Hello, welcome to another episode of the MABE podcast. I am Andrew Rogers. I am the president of MABE, and I am your podcast host with today's special guest, Dr. Michelle Yzquierdo. Welcome, Dr. Yzquierdo.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Andrew. I'm excited to be here with you.
I'm excited to be here with you. So I thought, because I think I know you well enough, just from because whatever you're presenting, you're always giving your backstory, which is great. But so I'm just going to go into this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. But here I go with a brief bio of your adult life. So you finished college, you had a degree, you went into an alternative certification program, and there were a lot of multilingual learners where you were teaching, and you did not feel you were meeting their needs, and you looked around and you did not feel others were meeting their needs, and that compelled you to work hard at doing better by these students to get your own doctorate in this degree, and a lot of other things happened, culminating in your wonderful book, Pathways to Greatness for ELL newcomers. And you also have a wonderful family with two wonderful kids.
That's like the best elevator spiel of my life. So yeah, that was perfect.
I first learned about you through that book and seeing you present at the WIDA conference when it was in Detroit back in, I believe, 2018. And again, that was a time, where there's so many more conversations now about newcomers, which is great. But today we're actually going to talk about something adjacent to that, because Dr. Yzquierdo is returning to MABE this year.
Yay, I'm excited.
As a featured speaker. And then you're also doing a week later 7 Steps in Northern Michigan, which I will be there as well. So excited to have our Northern Michigan folk experience, your wonderful presentation.
Oh, stop it louder. Thank you.
All right. So today's topic is, so you had this session at MABE that I have not seen. I don't know anything about it specifically, but I have some ideas. So the session is called, I know you don't want to attend a session on content and language objectives, but you should. First of all, tell us about content and language objectives.
So I want to talk about the title really quick, because I thought no one's coming to a session on content and language objectives. No one is nobody's coming to MABE to hear a session on content and language objectives. So I figured if I titled it that way and just owned it, that people might be intrigued to show up. But it worked a little bit if it was intriguing enough for you to ask me about it. So I think the reason I want to talk about content and language objectives is because, well, 2 reasons. Either we're not doing it, like I go into a classroom and it takes me 20 minutes. Let me digress and say I do spend a lot of my time working inside classrooms, coaching and modeling and giving feedback to teachers. And I can't tell you how many times I'm in the back of the classroom taking notes, and I'm 15, 20 minutes into the class period, and I'm like, wait, what are we doing? Like, what's the purpose of all of this? And then opportunities to give feedback to the teacher. And I always found myself asking the same questions. What was your intent in doing that? And what was your purpose for doing that? And I think the one thing that we could all grow on is just the intentionality of the work that we do with kids. And that all comes back to the objectives. But on that same note, I'll go into a classroom and I'll see objectives on the board, but nobody does anything with them. And it's honestly the same reason probably that I wrote the objectives on the board when I was a baby on certified teachers, because somebody told me to. So I just think it's an old topic, kind of, to say it in a different word, but it's something that we really need to think about. And when I do trainings, I tell people all the time, if nothing about your life changes after listening to me talk for 6 hours, and the only thing I accomplish is convincing you that content and language objectives are important, even if no one's checking boxes. And I think that's what it's about. It's just such an important piece for our kiddos.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what would you say are the primary barriers, or the primary barrier, what's stopping people from writing content and language objectives?
I think it's the same reason that stopped me. I just didn't see the value in them. Honestly, I didn't have an opinion one way or the other. So as a brand new uncertified teacher, I was just trying to get through the end of the day without crying, right? And so they told me to put this stuff up on the board, and I did every day. And I think that a lot of people are in this compliance mode. Like, it's just one of the 962 things that teachers have to do every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think anybody is necessarily opposed to it. I just don't think they realize the value. It's something we do for our administrators. It's something we put in lesson plans, but it doesn't often translate into instructional practices. And the reason why we put that stuff up on the board is for the kids and not the administrators. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily an obstacle. I think people are just in compliance mode. They just don't recognize the value.
Yes. And I'm just gonna stop here. I got out my old SciOp book. Well, it's not that old. I think it's one of the newer editions, but so content objectives, statements that identify what students should know and be able to do for a subject area for a given lesson versus language objectives that are statements that identify what students should know and be able to do while learning English or another language in a given lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So, why don't I'll just talk again. You can tell me if I'm hot, I'm cold, if you have something more to add. But basically, so again, the content derived from standards. What is the big idea? What's the big picture of this? And then the language. I know they used to say content is the what, language is the how, and then people didn't like that. They said that well, they're both the what's, but um, more importantly than that, I would say, so then language is again, what are the students going to do in terms of reading, writing, listening, and or speaking to achieve that objective?
To your point about what's an obstacle, and I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think sometimes the problem is we overcomplicate things, right? Like I know everybody's got an opinion about everything, about whether they should be we will or I can or we can or the learner will or swab that, which I always get a kick out of that. Students will be able to, like, who are these students? Where are these random students that are going to do this thing? And I like to keep things simple, and I know people could send me research and emails and tell me that I'm wrong, but just this idea of seeing it that way. The content comes from your standards and it's what kids are supposed to learn, and the language objective is your language goal, your language target, whatever we want to call it. And I always say, and again, I know there are 4 language domains, but I always say focus on the output. Focus on students talking or writing. Now, there might be a listening task and there might be a reading task, but we turn that into an output task. The content is the what, and simply, I just tell people, how can kids talk about or write about what you've taught them today? And, we split hairs over whether it's the what or the how, and we just make things so complicated. I was in a high school once somewhere, I don't know, out in West Texas, and I swear they had like a 4-point or 5-point objective, something completely crazy. And
Mhm.
I was like, I wouldn't even know how to write that. So our teachers are spending so much time trying to figure out what goes up on the board instead of just thinking about what are my kids supposed to learn? And then how can they talk about it or write about it? And I hear teachers all the time, especially our newcomers, right? They say things like, well, they're just not getting it. And I'm like, do they even know what it is? Like, I don't even know what it is. So just the value in that, let's get it up on the board and let's start using it purposely for our students. This is what you're learning about today, and make it clear and concise. This is how you're going to talk to your friend about it, or this is how you're going to write your exit ticket. And once we get those fundamentals in place, then we can split hairs and debate whether it's the what, the how, the why, and all of that stuff. I just think we make things too complicated.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, it's not easy, and I would say that if, a district or a school is wanting to do this, like, that really needs to be your academic focus probably for the year, because
100%.
breaking that down, I mean, it took me, and granted, I mean, I came of age in terms of this pedagogy at a time when there were not podcasts about. I mean, I'm talking about being 2000, 2010, and then maybe about 2015, that time, we had access to a lot more information. We could communicate better as a larger community. Um, but I mean, it took me a long time then just to really internalize and understand, where does content end and language begin, or where do they mesh and where are they separate? And again, for our ELLs, we say, okay, how can you maintain the integrity of the content but lessen the language demands? And again, I don't think those are completely separate, but there is space for that in there. And again, if a student is not able to produce the language, they're not at a proficiency level where they can produce the language of their peers, we have to work with them. We have to find a way, and it might not demonstrate everything they know, but hopefully it's enough. And hopefully it's
100%.
something.
And I'm laughing because when you were saying coming of age, like, certainly before podcasts and everything, but man, like we saved our stuff on a floppy disk, right? Like not in the cloud. So And when I was a baby teacher, we all went to PSYOP training and they said, thou shalt write content language objectives. And I was like, what the heck is a language objective? So I swear for probably a good, I'm ashamed to even admit this, for a very long time, every day on the board, I had students will discuss. And I would just erase the part they were just, we never really did it. It was just
Mhm.
check a box, right? So I think even when I was in the classroom, I never got to the point that you just mentioned right now, where I truly understood what those things were, like, and what to do with it. And so I remember going to my AP, like, what's a language objective? He's like, I don't know. We all just learned this together, right? So I agree. I think it's something we need to, if a school is really interested in implementing that, the message has to be from the administrator's perspective, this is not for me. This is for your students. Communicate to them what they're going to get out of your class today and be specific as you can. And then what can your language target be? How can they use the vocabulary of your class to write or to speak?
Yes, and I would say too, one way to gauge yourself, if you are trying to do this, is if it's a real struggle. And of course, there's this other thing called the daily grind, which we understand very well, and it's real. It is real. But there's a lot of people. I mean, you say, okay, I want you to write content and language objectives, and it sounds horrible, but it's partially somewhat because again, they they don't know how to do them effectively, and if you haven't done it before, you haven't been trained on it, that's legit. And again, it's a
100%.
process. So what are those baby steps, would you say, if you've not done this before?
It's very essence, I would say, to a brand new teacher. Because you're at the board, you have your, I'm old school, right? You have your dry erase
Mhm.
marker. And speaking of that, like I see objectives embedded in Google Slides and everything. And I always tell people, that's great. But when the Google slide goes away, so do the objectives. And part of the reason I think these are so important is as a teacher, I want to revisit them frequently throughout the period. So I would tell teachers, take a deep breath, right? Let's get something up on the board. And you know what that something is because your kids ask you, right? Mister, what are we doing today? Miss, what are we doing today? Well, okay, guys, we're going to talk about the differences between plant and animal cells. Well, there you go, right? So then I would say, okay, well, how many differences are there? Okay, 4, 5, 6. How many are you going to get to today? Don't overthink it. Put that up on the board. Today we're going to differentiate the 3 differences or the 4 differences. And I think, again, just giving teachers permission, and I always, again, make this joke in training, like there are no content and language objective police. Like no one's coming to take you to jail if what you write up on the board's not perfect. Just get
Mhm.
something on the board. It might be a bulleted list, right? Just that is a visual list, a cue for your students, and reflect back on it. Okay, guys, so remember we're talking about the 3 characteristics today. That was characteristic number 1. Let's do characteristic number 2. Let's do characteristic number 3. So when the AP does come in and whispers to the kid, what are you doing today? Right? Kids are like, nothing. They should say, well, we're looking at the 3 characteristics of the blah, blah, blah. So I think that would be the baby step is don't overthink it. Whatever would come out of your mouth, if a kid said, hey, miss, hey, mister, what are we doing today? That's the baby step for your content objective.
Yeah, and one of the things I like too is it feels like kind of a cheat, but it really isn't. It's just like good teaching, I guess. But when you get to that point when you're able to put vocabulary words, sentence frames, paragraph frames, sentence starters, what have you, into your language objectives, then it's also like kind of a micro exposure. So
Mm-hmm.
before you get to these words, or oftentimes it's words students are familiar with, but maybe don't entirely understand or need to understand better in this context, it's kind of like, a little something that you can put in before you actually get to it. So they're just like that much more prepared for it come time.
So yeah, I would say again to the question of baby steps, my goal is to just get teachers to put this stuff up on the board. Again, once we get past that and we get good at that, then we can split hairs and talk about all the other things. But to your point again, I would say that's what we're doing, the 3 characteristics of the blah, blah, blah. And sometimes I don't even call it a language objective. I just call it the sentence stem. So let's just bare bones. What are we learning about today? And what is the sentence stem or the vocabulary that we're going to use to talk about it or write about it? And if every teacher had those 2 things up on the board every day and had a purposeful, intentional opportunity in their class for the students to use that sentence, either orally or in writing, I mean, think about how much more language practice our kids would get.
Yeah, absolutely. How does having language objectives as well as content objectives, how does that benefit learners who are not multilingual learners in the classroom?
That's a great question. And, I would say my first go to answer is every kid benefits from knowing what the target is. And the analogy I use in training is if I put a blindfold on you and spun you around, like old school pin the tail on the donkey, right? Like you put a blindfold on, you spin somebody around, and what are the odds that they're going to put that tail on that donkey where it needs to go? So I would say the same is true for any kid in class. If we're not telling them what the purpose of life is today in second grade science or seventh grade history or whatever, and we're going through the motions, what are the odds we're actually going to hit the target? So let's tell kids what the target is. And I think that would benefit any kid. And the second reason, let's talk about the language objective now, is how many of our non-EB, our non-multilingual learners speak perfect academic English, right? And again, I'm telling you all my jokes today, but I say in a training, the phospholipid bilayer is semi-permeable. Like, do all of our kids go, oh, totally, I know what that is? No, nobody knows what that is. So everybody benefits from having a clearly articulated target, and everybody benefits from having a language goal to practice with as well.
Excellent. And then last question, what are some places, so say we have people listening to this who are teachers and they really have not had this training, or they had it a long time ago, they're not in contact with people who would know, where can people find resources to help them learn more about content and language objectives?
So I would say the thing that I think most teachers are challenged with is that language objective. So I would say, whatever you're teaching, look for sentence stems and put it in the Google machine, right? Sentence stems for the American Revolution or the key vocabulary. So I don't necessarily think it's a resource to go to, but rather just a thought process. What are you teaching today? How can you make it as finite as possible? So it's not just the characteristics, but it's the 4 characteristics. It's not just the steps, it's the 3 steps or whatever. And then go to your standards. That's the best place to look. Go to your standards for that key vocabulary and list that up there and plan in your lesson for the opportunity when students are going to use that key vocabulary.
Yeah, and sorry, I've unrelated. You before we part ways, you are working on a second book.
Oh my gosh, you're going to ask my new book. Yes, I am. Or actually, okay, y'all, if everybody listening, Andrew and I did not plan any of these questions. Like, this is just legit. It's right here, friend. Look, it's done. It's in the
Wow.
hands of the production team of Silence Education. And I'm so glad this is going to sound like a shameless plug, like we planned this, but it's about, it's actually called Remix, Revamp, Revolutionize, Do Less, Teach More, and actually reach every kid. And it's on teaching via stations. And I know elementary teachers have been doing stations since the beginning of time, but it's certainly not something that I learned about as a secondary teacher. And speaking of content language objectives, everything I talk about in this new book about how do you set your stations? Well, what are your objectives? How do we assess? Well, what are your objectives? Like, it all comes back to those solid content objectives.
Excellent. I can't wait. I cannot wait. I'm sure it'll be out soon enough, and I'll be there ready for it. Thanks so much for joining us today. Did you have any final thoughts, questions?
No, I'm excited to see everybody next week. I hope the weather's great. I hope it's nice and not 197 degrees there like it is here already.
Yeah, it's
I'm
probably a good
excited to
time of
be.
year to be in Michigan versus Texas.
Yes, I'm excited to come and see y'all. So I'm going to have anybody listening, come see me in my sessions. I have 2 of them, and it's always a fun time coming up to Michigan to see y'all.
Great. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.